places to look in the basket.
I want to see my mommy. Please, no. I want to see my... I want to see...
Put the fucking lotion in the basket!
Wait, lions before lambs? I must be watching the wrong sheep movie.
Unfunny joke is unfunny.
Would there have been an uproar if this text said Quantico, Virginia, and we could have just figured out the woods part for ourselves?
Notice how it says near Quantico. This is not taking place in Quantico, only close to it, meaning that this location card actually makes sense.
Look, I know this is the official title of the movie, but everybody calls this Silence of the Lambs. Drop the movie. You're sounding more like the Transformers the movie.
Everything wrong with the Silence of the Lambs, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of people leave out the word the from the title.
I'm sure this training sequence is here to illustrate Clarice Starling's tenacity and stuff, but it has jack to do with the movie. Does anything related to cracking the Buffalo Bill case have to do with her physical fitness? Is there a deleted scene where Lecter challenges her to a 40-yard dash?
Jesus Christ, how does somebody who literally watches movies for a living not understand some of the most basic aspects of storytelling? Clarice is the main character of this movie, meaning that her characterization is pivotal to the story. And guess what the purpose of this opening scene is? Characterization.
Crawford wants to see you in his office.
Thank you, sir.
Weird. Is she doing the obstacle course in reverse to get back to Crawford's office? God damn, that is commitment. I think I'm in love.
So he's at least somewhat capable of picking up on characterization, as proven by this sin, but instead of removing a sin for it, he added one? What the hell? Why? The next two sins are perfect examples of the sins writers pointing out totally inconsequential details just to force two sins out of the movie. Guess how many sins that's worth?
Is Crawford's office really past all this bullshit, or is Clarice taking the long expositional route to get to it?
It obviously is past all of this, which isn't a sin because it's perfectly reasonable. Besides, he just mentioned the exposition that the movie is giving us in this scene, which you would think would tip him off that this scene is important and necessary for the story, negating one of his earlier sins.
You looking for Crawford?
Yes, sir.
Well, he should be back in a couple minutes.
Why the is it so urgent for that one dude to track down Clarice in the middle of her obstacle course if he's not even in his office right now? Why couldn't she finish it, take a shower, then get her assignment?
It's pretty obvious that the guy who tracked her down on the obstacle course didn't know that he would leave his office. This is not a sin because you shouldn't expect a human character to be omniscient.
Job's come up, and I thought about you. Not a job, really, more of an interesting errand.
And, well, I like pulling people out of their exercises and giving them the news while they're super sweaty and tired. I sort of make a game out of it.
Okay, yet again, I'm left wondering how a person who makes a living from watching movies can misunderstand storytelling so badly. A big theme of this movie is misogyny and how it affects Clarice, which this scene subtly demonstrates. Pulling her from the course before she's even done and not even giving her a chance to clean up first is disrespectful and also places her in a vulnerable position compared to the man in this scene. If you would simply pay attention, you might realize these things.
See, double major, psych and criminology, graduated magna.
Nothing you or I need to rehash, but really, it'll be great for anyone who might be listening.
It's called confirming someone's qualifications, bud. You can't sin something that's totally realistic.
Why the urgency? Is there some connection between him and Buffalo Bill, maybe?
I wish there were. I want your full attention, Starling.
Movie has its chance to answer why this was so urgent, and goddamn fails.
Nope, it doesn't fail at all. If you would simply watch the scene you're watching, you might actually start to pick up on certain things and understand what's really happening. But I guess you're incapable of doing that.
Be very careful with Hannibal Lecter.
Crawford goes on to name a laundry list of do's and don'ts for Starling, but it's only after she's been dismissed and asks a follow-up question. I know there's a little sleight of hand happening here by Jack, but was he seriously going to let her walk off without these caveats if she hadn't dawdled?
So you admit that there's some sleight of hand going on, but then still sin it anyway? That's just laughably ignorant.
His mouthpiece and restraints were removed for an EKG. When the nurse leaned over him, he did this to her.
And I keep this picture in my pocket for a dramatic reveal just before I walk someone into the restricted area. Showing this to you back in my office? Well, that would just be silly.
Are you really sinning the movie for having a character show a picture to another character while he's explaining the context around the picture instead of before explaining the context? That's dumb.
Hi, I'm Barney.
Barney politely waits for the camera, Clarice, to solely focus on his face before actually bothering to introduce himself.
Jesus Christ, is this going to be the entire video? Jeremy just doesn't understand storytelling at all. This whole scene is a masterclass in tension building. That's why Barney waited for the camera. Grow a brain.
This is certainly a scary murderer's row that she's walking down, but what the f*** are these stairs at the end of the hallway? If the one end of the hallway requires going through 2 gates to even get inside, then why is all this left wide open? And where does it lead? And why couldn't they save time and just have Clarice come down those stairs right by Lecter's cell?
There are hundreds of possible answers to these questions, rendering it moot. Just because the movie doesn't outright explain something doesn't mean there isn't a reasonable explanation.
Do you know why he's called Buffalo Bill? Please tell me. The newspapers won't say.
They won't? Isn't the etiology of this salacious name exactly what a newspaper would detail? And even if they didn't, someone with the intellect of Lecter could easily be able to piece that together, right?
It's entirely plausible that the newspapers wouldn't mention a detail like this. As for the part about Lecter piecing it together himself, that's exactly what he did. He's not asking Clarice because he genuinely wants to know. He's asking her because he's testing her. This is yet more characterization that you completely fail to understand.
Barney is shown to be a pretty astute and compassionate guard, right? And he reiterated that Clarice isn't supposed to go near the glass. So why isn't he at least saying something right about now?
Because he's all the way at the end of the hall in a different room and presumably can't tell exactly how close she is to the glass? That was an easy explanation.
And that accent you've tried so desperately to shed, pure West Virginia.
Wait, Starling's current accent is what happened when she tried to shed it? Holy she must have sounded like Boomhauer before all that work.
Everything wrong with Silence of the Lambs, ladies and gentlemen. A Southerner has a strong accent.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice chianti.
Man, I have a feeling Lecter would have been instantly deported from Italy if they caught him pronouncing Chianti this way.
Says the guy who constantly pronounces words and names like a fucking Neanderthal. Hypocrisy is hypocritical.
Also, what a weird way to refer to a census taker, since the census itself is obviously not a test. Did he challenge Hannibal to battle of wits or something? Did it involve iocane powder and 2 glasses of wine? I'm just saying, sure, iconic line and all, but seems like there's a lot more sizzle than steak in this dialogue.
Holy shit, you really are stupid, aren't you? Clearly he wasn't calling the census a test. He was saying that the census taker, or in other words the person, tried to test him. Why is that a sin? You just made a dumb Princess Bride joke and then said the line doesn't have much meaning, but you never explain why. What doesn't make sense about it? Also, Jeremy makes a pop culture reference that isn't a sin of the episode cliche.
I wouldn't dare show you what happens to Clarice next, because gross scene is gross. But Miggs, who is next door, is about to fling semen at Clarice through the bars in his cell with a devastating accuracy that porn stars can't even muster.
Somebody sounds a little jealous.
Agent Starling!
How the f*** could Lecter see what happened that far down the hall?
Because the angle the movie is currently showing us is 100% conducive to him seeing it? Seriously, just watch the movie and you'll get it.
Go seek out Miss Moffat, an old patient of mine.
So wait, when Miggs disrespected Clarice earlier, Lecter decided not to give any information. Now that he's done it again, in one of the most heinous ways possible, Lecter feels obligated to give her something? Wow, how convenient.
This is yet another detail that you would have to read between the lines to understand. Or, more accurately, you'd have to read the book, which, side note, is another piece of evidence for why the books do matter. Hannibal preys on predators. In other words, his victims are people who routinely prey on others or have power over others. In this scene, he realizes that Clarice is different from the other FBI agents he's encountered. The semen being shot at her proves that she is actually a victim herself, which is why he decides to help her.
Also, where the f*** is Barney?
In the other room? Wait, why is that a sin? What do you want him to do? Come in and start beating the shit out of Miggs from coming in Clarice's direction? Do you really think that's how prisons work? Do you honestly think Barney gives a shit?
Daddy! Hey, Clarice.
Don't get too excited, kid. There's a good chance he's actually an alien, currently chilling in the Vega system.
Jeremy makes a pop culture reference that isn't a sin of the movie cliche.
The Hannibal Lecter article is about Hannibal Lecter, which is great. The articles to the left and right of that article are those classic 1990s bullshit filler articles with non-specific information about taxes and how governments are doing stuff and people are something. I wonder if these very articles with these exact words have been in literally hundreds of movies. A documentary about this would only interest me and would be awesome.
This is the kind of shit I'm talking about. What about this rant is sinful? Seriously, how is the movie making a mistake by throwing some filler articles on the side of the newspaper? That's what real newspapers do. Like, pretty much every single newspaper puts the less important stories on the sides. It's not a sin.
The judge in the Hannibal Lecter case was called Judge Detox. I'm sure the prosecutor was Alexander Rehab.
Unfunny joke is unfunny.
I thought the yourself reference was too hokey for Lecter, so I figured he's from Baltimore, and I looked in the phone book, and there's a yourself storage facility.
Man, what a gigantic leap to come to that conclusion just because of a hokey reference.
That's really not a giant leap at all. She uses the background information she was given about Lecter to look in a phone book for something that matched what he said, and she found something. What about that is unrealistic?
Also, it turns out the storage facility was rented by a Moffat. And the rent was paid in advance. And this is an actionable clue regarding one of the biggest criminals in history, but Crawford sends a cadet to check it out on her own.
So long as you're asking questions, I'm going to as well. Why would Clarice need backup for a storage unit? It's not like there's an army living inside it, she's just going there to check what other clues are inside. Going to the unit itself isn't really a dangerous action, it's just simple investigation.
I guess considering the storage facility's clever name, Clarice is jacking yourself off.
Jeremy makes a cringy sexual joke that isn't funny cliché. Also, considering one of the most important themes in this movie is the misogyny that Clarice herself faces within the FBI, this joke is incredibly tone-deaf.
I did not kill him, I assure you, merely tucked him away very much as I found him after he'd missed 3 appointments.
Yes, I went and made a house call and found him dead, and then decided to rent a storage unit for 10 years and put him inside there. You never know when you might need a head in a jar. Those lines at Disneyland are long, and sometimes you can grease the ride operator with some free stuff.
Was that rant meant as a joke? If so, that's embarrassing. You should try to actually make your jokes funny from time to time.
Garden variety manic depressive. No, just think of him as a kind of experiment. A fledgling killer's first effort at transformation.
So Buffalo Bill killed Hannibal's patient, and this was all before he went to jail, which we know was at least 10 years ago. How did all this happen so perfectly? God damn it, I know Lecter is brilliant, but there are flourishes here that are just as unnecessary as a car jumping out of a skyscraper in a Fast and Furious movie.
So the sin is that a coldly calculated genius is smart? That's dumb. Also, Jeremy makes a pop culture reference that isn't a sin of the movie cliche.
Catherine sings Tom Petty's American Girl, and I'm beginning to believe that Tom Petty is the artist filmmakers go to when they need a really super obvious song to play about someone's character, like when Tom Cruise is singing Free Fallin' in Jerry Maguire.
This scene is funny to me because he acknowledges the very on-the-nose symbolism of the song being played in this scene, but can't recognize the more subtle symbolism in other scenes. See what I mean when I compare him to a little kid? He understands the obvious stuff, but not the more hidden stuff.
Unnecessary night vision goggles are unnecessary, but way to plant that seed when they become really important later.
Why are they unnecessary? Sure, he can see in this lighting, but the goggles make it easier, which is the entire point. By using night vision, he's ensuring that the kidnapping goes more smoothly.
Also, I'm no senator's kid expert, but it seems kind of weird she lives alone in this rustic apartment complex when her mom is that much of a big deal.
Are you under the impression that the children of senators are given security details or something? That's just not true.
I know he's just stealing from the Ted Bundy playbook here, but he gets pretty lucky when Catherine helps him out. Bundy tried this in a place where there were tons of women. He's very specifically targeting this one woman.
Why the hell is this a sin? You mentioned Ted Bundy, who is literally real-world proof that this kidnapping method works, but you sinned it because she's alone and there's a possibility that she wouldn't be willing to help him? That's dumb because you could always just argue the opposite, that there's a possibility she would help him, which is what happens. Forced sin is forced. Oh, and stupid.
Starling! Outside.
Damn, I know they want Starling's help on the case and everything, but they keep interrupting her training. How's she gonna learn how to take a series of punches from much larger men now?
The line about taking punches from bigger men seems to indicate that he somewhat understands the theme of misogyny, but he still somehow can't grasp the fact that interrupting her training sessions plays right into that theme.
Buffalo Bill gets around more than Johnny Cash, man. According to the movie, he's been in Memphis, Tennessee, Elk River, West Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Belvedere, Ohio, Chicago, Illinois, and God knows where else. Hell, at this point, Buffalo itself may be the only city he hasn't been to.
I genuinely almost laughed out loud when I heard this sin for the first time. Everything he just said should actually be a sin off, if anything. The movie is telling us that Buffalo Bill has kidnapped people and dumped bodies in multiple locations as a method of confusing the police. This is exactly what real-life serial killers have done before, but he's acting as if it's an unrealistic thing.
We find out later that Crawford was using Starling to get info from Lecter, but he doesn't really need her for this part, right? So is he actually interested in Clarice, as Lecter suggested? If so, it's certainly not even hinted at in the movie itself.
Hold up, what did he just say? Did he just try to claim that Crawford's attraction to Clarice is never hinted at in the movie? Why do you feel the need to lie to your audience? I mean, this scene right here, where you yourself pointed out the fact that he doesn't need to be spending this time with Clarice, is hinting at his attraction. Stop lying.
Crashing a funeral.
Pointing things out on the screen.
Jesus Christ, if only they had Google in this movie, it'd be at least 40 minutes shorter.
What? What is he even sitting here? He just played a random clip from the movie and said that it wouldn't be as long if they had Google, which is simply not a sin in any way.
But Also, I'm wondering how long it took for Buffalo Bill to find a house that had a well in it. We find out later he killed the person who owned the house and took it over himself. But what was that scouting mission like?
We don't know, and it doesn't actually matter because it has nothing to do with the story that this movie is trying to tell. If Buffalo Bill already has the house when the movie starts, we have to assume that his method of attaining it worked and is therefore not a sin.
Catherine Martin, the 25-year-old daughter of Senator Ruth Martin, listed first as a missing person, is now believed to have been kidnapped by the serial killer known only as Buffalo Bill.
This is Starling's first time hearing this, and it's on the local news? How has she not been briefed on this yet? She's on the investigative team.
Is there no such thing as revision on the Cinemasins writing staff? Just a few sins ago, they removed a bunch of sins for the misogynistic details in the movie, but now he's ignoring that theme in order to force another sin from this scene. Proofreading is a miraculous thing that apparently hasn't been invented yet for them.
Also, this seems like a pretty convenient kidnapping for the FBI, because Catherine is a senator's daughter. The interest in catching Buffalo Bill ratchets up to the point that the government is willing to give Hannibal Lecter a better place to live if he can give them information that will save her.
How is it even remotely possible for a kidnapping to be convenient? Do you hear yourself when you speak?
She keeps repeating the name.
And I promise he sees Catherine as a person and not just an object. It's harder to tear her up.
That might be true, but it has absolutely no bearing on this film whatsoever. This moment plays like a PSA to the audience.
Actually, it does matter to the movie. It represents Buffalo Bill's view of his victims as objects in the sense that he is turning them into suits, which are literal objects. Paying attention to the movie might be helpful for you.
This is the number for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Please, I think you discuss this with him, or you let me do my job.
Awesome! Boss, power move, go girl! But still, this works.
Jeremy sends something he likes cliche.
Was it a butterfly?
Yes, a moth. Just like the one we found in Benjamin Raspail's head an hour ago.
Wait, so Buffalo Bill has been putting moths in his victims' throats since the very beginning of his serial killing? I mean, Benjamin was one of his first, right? And he's killed a bunch of people after that. But no one has noticed this until just now.
No one has made the connection until recently. It took multiple victims for a pattern to become obvious. Before now, it could have boiled down to a coincidence. But now, it's happened too many times. This is actually very realistic.
So, how the did you guys not find the moth in that dude's head earlier? I realized the discovery of the moth in that last victim would lead you to go back and check on another victim, but the only thing left of that dude was a head. There wasn't much to examine. A moth should have been found way before that.
Clarice only found the head recently. The autopsy wasn't performed until after it was found. You know, because you can't typically do an autopsy on something you don't have.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Buffalo Bill is one of the most scrupulous serial killers of all time, but to punish his victims while in captivity, he uses, common hose.
Hoses on high power settings are not pleasant to get hit by, so yes, that is how he punishes his victims, and that's not a sin.
This scene is supposed to be creepy, but they totally copied Steve Buscemi's character from Con Air.
Jeremy makes a pop culture reference that isn't a sin of the movie cliche.
What?
Did you breastfeed her?
Now, wait a minute.
Yes, I did.
Toughened your nipples, didn't it?
I know Lecter is f***ing around here, but what a childish thing to say. Is this even an insult?
The fact that you think this is supposed to be an insult kind of makes you seem childish. He's not insulting her, he's playing with her emotional connection to her daughter.
Yes, Lewis Friend is an anagram for iron sulfide, or fool's gold, but Lecter never wrote it down, so how does Starling know that Lewis is spelled this way? It could easily be Lewis, right?
Hey bud, you want to look right here at this? Clearly, she factored that possibility in, but then ended up ruling it out.
Think if Catherine lives, you won't wake up in the dark ever again.
What? Up until now, Hannibal has been on point with his predictions of Clarice, but this is a big old leap in logic. She's trying to save the girl because she's on the case, man. No need to throw in extra dramatics to what already is a super compelling narrative.
Dude, Lecter is making a very logical connection between Clarice's desire to solve the case and her desire to end her own personal torment. That is not a giant leap at all.
Again, if they're worried about sharp, pointy things being an issue, why let Hannibal use a radio? There are all kinds of sharp, pointy things in and on that.
Yes, but he can't use a radio like a knife. Radios are heavier than something like a pen, and you can't grip it the same way, meaning it would be next to useless in a fight.
I guess I can believe Hannibal getting out of his handcuffs using Chilton's pen that he somehow stole while he was wrapped up in that restraining harness, but I cannot believe he can unlock the handcuffs without his arms moving just a little bit. Even if he's somehow using just his fingers, and he's moving slowly, something would be visibly moving.
You're correct that something would be visibly moving, and that something is his hand with the pen, not his entire arm. Besides, the guards aren't even directly looking at him right now, so they wouldn't notice anything anyway.
Wow, it's almost like there should have been more than 2 fairly incompetent guards assigned to the most dangerous inmate on the planet.
This is one of those sins where he criticizes the characters within a movie for making a mistake. Yes, they screwed up, But that's not a flaw of the movie because characters are supposed to make mistakes.
Oh, Pambury, asking to tell. CP. Shots fired on 5.
First off, you make a lot of assumptions, mister. You know for a fact those gunshots were on 5? I mean, yeah, I'd assume that as well. But aren't you going to try to call the 2 cops on the 5th floor first?
Admits that he would assume they were fired on 5, still sends it.
Second, how or why did the officers up there have any guns at all? This mother has a history of extreme violence, and correctional officers rarely, if ever, carry firearms.
They had firearms because of how dangerous he is. Guns would be much more efficient in stopping him than a baton would be.
Look!
She says look, as in, look, I have no idea why we're waiting so long to use the stairs in this building.
What? They obviously have officers stationed at the stairs and the elevators as well as every exit to the building. This isn't a sin.
Chris Isaac isn't frolicking on the beach with his naked girlfriend in this scene.
Jeremy wants a boner.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that if you tear someone's face off... Wait a minute. Mandatory clip.
I'd like to take his face off.
When you tear someone's face off, it isn't going to look nearly as good as this, even if you clearly have practice like Hannibal Lecter does.
And why is that? You just mentioned how he has practice, so I don't see the issue with this.
I guess Lecter planned for this blood to start dripping right when he got escorted into the elevator so that it would distract the cops and he could carry out the next phase of his plan. He's a genius, don't you question it.
Or maybe he simply knew that it would start dripping at some point to distract them. I mean, Lecter is probably aware of the fact that physics don't turn on and off, so he was able to figure out that the blood would drip at some point. Nobody ever said he knew exactly when.
There's seriously not a more direct way to contact Clarice than calling the dorm hallway phone. This whole movie has been people showing up in person to ask for her.
You're complaining about there not being a more efficient way to contact Clarice, but your suggestion is to meet with her in person? Do you really not see the flaw in your logic?
Clarice, doesn't this random scattering of sight seem desperately random?
There's only one case file on Buffalo Bill, right? So Clarice has been hoarding it this whole time? Is there seriously no one else working on this case right now?
The movie literally never suggested that at all. I have no idea where you're pulling that from. Maybe your ass?
Clarice may never have looked in this other room if it wasn't for this meowing cat. Meow ex machina. Follow me, Clarice, to understanding!
Aside from the fact that Clarice most likely still would have looked in the other room if the cat hadn't meowed, you also misused the term deus ex machina once again.
Look, I know Starling is a good detective and she has the profile on Gump, but she spends like 7 minutes investigating this place and somehow puts all this together.
Yes, because she's a good detective. How can you provide the reasoning for why something isn't a sin, and then still sin it?
Weirdly, this is my daily affirmation too.
Jeremy has a boner. For himself. Between the next 3 sins, there are a total of 6 pop culture references, so guess how many sins that's worth.
Guy looks back for Jack to give him a signal, and boy, does Jack ever give him a signal. But apparently it's not to tear the door down, it's to ring the doorbell again.
Jeremy points things out on the screen cliche.
Gotta say, I'm a little surprised Bill decides to answer the door, and I'm a little surprised that Clarice has rung the bell this many times when the person might not even be at home. She doesn't think she's found the killer's house. She thinks she's about to talk to some sweet old lady.
Right, but she thinks she can get some valuable information from her. As for the part about Buffalo Bill answering the door, he does it so as to avoid any suspicion.
No one here, Jack. Clarice.
Okay, so we know Clarice is in danger, but how does Jack know she's in danger? Remember, when they last talked, all he said was,
I need you to link him to the Bimmel girl before he's indicted. See what you can dredge up in Belvedere.
All she does is say yes to that, but nothing about visiting an address. Gum could be literally anywhere. His kill network is like 1,000 miles in diameter.
Yeah, but based on the fact that Crawford is not an idiot, he's able to piece 2 and 2 together, unlike you.
Notice the butterfly, notice the butterfly, notice the butterfly!
Jeremy yells at the screen cliche.
I know a guy who hates Jodie Foster, like the way the rest of the world hates Andie MacDowell, and I've never understood it because she's great, especially when she's not vain about making a perfectly appropriate weird face for an honest performance. So while I say Dan, the guy that hates Jodie Foster, I have to give the movie a sin for making me think about it.
A whole bunch of bullshit.
FBI! You're safe!
I'll let Catherine take this.
Safe! Get me out of here!
Jeremy sends something he agrees with cliche.
It seems like every time in movies when somebody needs to wedge something into a doorknob, there's a perfectly sized tool nearby that does just that. And it's doubtful it would even work, but the movie is saying it does, so...
But it doesn't work. I mean, Buffalo Bill comes into the room later to kill Clarice, so I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
This might be the luckiest shot of all time. It's totally dark in here. Even if he's directly behind her, knowing whether you've turned a full 180 would be hard to know.
She doesn't know, though. She's firing at random out of panic.
Clarice M. Starling.
She caught Buffalo Bill on her own, and this is the weak sauce reception she gets for graduating. This auditorium should erupt like the end of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Not really. Yes, she did a really fantastic job, but the FBI isn't exactly known for throwing pizza parties for their graduates or whatever the hell you want to happen right now. It's the government, not some coddling parent who's super proud of her.
Starling.
Well, Clarice, have the lambs stopped screaming?
Villain knows exactly where the protagonist is and how to reach her in a public area, even from a broad cliche.
And that's a classic misuse of the term cliche.
Where are you, Dr. Lecter?
I have no plans to call on you, Clarice.
But the next time we see each other, I'll be Julianne Moore.
Skip.
Dr. Lecter?
No one in this crowded FBI hall hears Clarice loudly talk to the most nefarious criminal on the most wanted list, even when she repeatedly refers to him by name.
What exactly is your definition of the word loudly? She's actually speaking pretty quietly right now.
Where's the lamb sauce?